General Hospital spoilers reveal that Sidwell had spent years mastering the art of indirect warfare, making enemies disappear with the flick of a phone call. Collapsing empires with whispers instead of gunshots. But the moment he received confirmation that Marco had been taken by Sonny Corinthos, all that careful restraint was obliterated. Marco hadn't just vanished, he'd been abducted, bound, humiliated, hidden away like some disposable pawn in a petty territorial game. To Sidwell, it wasn't just a message. It was a declaration of war. And wars, as he knew too well, weren't won with honor. They were won with fear. With precision. With pain. He stood alone in his private compound that night, watching the security footage of Marco's last known movements. His fists clenched tighter with each passing frame. This wasn't a calculated move from Sonny, it was personal. And now, so was Sidwell's response. All diplomacy had been shredded by Sonny's recklessness. Sidwell had been willing to tolerate threats, sabotage, and even arson. But Marco was off limits. Marco was family. And when you threatened family, you signed your own death certificate. It didn't take long for Sidwell to identify the weakest points in Sonny's armor. He didn't need to go after Michael, he was too visible. He didn't need to target Carly, she was too volatile. No, if he wanted to inflict the kind of fear and suffering Sonny had just ignited, he would aim lower. Softer. More devastating. He would go after the children. Avery and Donna. Two young girls, living their lives unaware of the vendetta tightening around them. To the world, they were symbols of innocence. To Sonny, they were everything. And now, to Sidwell, they were leverage, irreplaceable, unguarded leverage. The mere idea of targeting them would be unthinkable to most. But Sidwell had already moved past that line. Sonny had taken his son. Sidwell would take his future. He began collecting information, school schedules, security protocols, known associates. Playgrounds frequented, bodyguard rotations. He didn't need to act immediately. He just needed to watch. To remind Sonny, silently and methodically, that no child in Port Charles was ever truly safe when their parent made enemies of men like him. Sidwell didn't want to hurt Avery and Donna. But he wanted Sonny to believe that he might. And that belief, that dread, the possibility that any moment could be the last time Sonny saw his daughter's smile, was the most powerful weapon Sidwell had. The obsession consumed him quickly. He stopped sleeping, stopped taking meetings. His focus narrowed until only Sonny's suffering mattered. He reviewed old surveillance footage of Sonny's properties, traced the girls' nannies, tested security weaknesses, rehearsed escape scenarios. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control. And it was about sending a message Sonny would never forget. You don't touch my son and walk away whole. Sidwell's allies noticed the change. He had always been cold, but now he was unstable, his tone sharper, his commands more erratic. One of his inner circle dared to question whether threatening children was a step too far, and within the hour, that associate was permanently removed from the organization. Sidwell wasn't just reacting. He was descending into something far more dangerous, a madness rooted not in violence for power, but violence for grief. A grief that no amount of retaliation could ever soothe. And so, in the shadows of Port Charles, two innocent girls were unknowingly caught in a war between titans. Avery played with dolls in the garden under heavy watch. Donna colored in her room, humming lullabies. Both protected by security, yes, but no fortress is impregnable when the threat is obsession. And Sidwell was now possessed by the idea of making Sonny feel helpless. Of making him live every day wondering if today was the day his enemy would strike. That uncertainty was the real punishment. That anticipation would rot Sonny from the inside out. To Sidwell, this was no longer a negotiation. It was chess. And he was making his move. He whispered into his encrypted phone late one night. We wait. We watch. And when the moment is perfect, we take something he can't replace. This was a new chapter in the war. One no longer defined by borders or power struggles. It was now defined by obsession. By the slow, deliberate dismantling of a man through the terror of what he might lose. And as Sidwell stared out into the night, the face of his kidnapped son burned in his mind, the obsession solidified into something even more terrifying. This wasn't about ending Sonny. It was about breaking him. One heartbeat at a time. The moment Carly realized Donna and Avery were gone, the air around her collapsed into suffocating silence. It wasn't just a mother's fear, it was a bone-deep, soul-shaking dread that consumed every part of her. 1 second the house had been filled with the soft sounds of childhood, laughter, footsteps, dolls being dragged across the floor, and the next, there was nothing. No giggles. No tiny voices calling her name. No answer when she called theirs. It was like they had been erased in an instant, leaving behind only an echo of what had been. Carly's mind raced through possibilities, through denials, through impossible rationalizations. But all of it fell apart when the staff admitted they hadn't seen the girls in over an hour and none of the security cameras were working. That silence, that lack of resistance or warning, was more terrifying than any scream, and deep inside, she knew this wasn't a mistake or a coincidence. It was a message, cold, calculated, and cruel. It was then she understood with absolute clarity. Sidwell had struck. Jen Sidwell, the man whose name had already brought smoke and blood into their lives, had escalated his war in a way that went far beyond business, power, or revenge. He had made it personal in the most unforgivable way. He hadn't just retaliated for the kidnapping of his son Marco, he had declared open war on the entire Corinthos family by targeting its most innocent, most sacred lives. Donna and Avery weren't pawns in this war. They were trophies, proof that Sidwell could reach into Sonny's house, into Carly's heart, and take whatever he wanted. Carly's panic was instant, primal. She screamed for Jason, demanded lockdown protocols, tore through phone records and surveillance archives, but it was useless. Every thread led to nothing. Footage had been wiped. GPS signals jammed. Communication lines burned clean. Whoever had done this had planned it in silence for days, maybe weeks, and had done so with an intimate knowledge of the Corinthos routines. That meant Sidwell wasn't working alone. He had people on the inside. And that realization brought with it a new kind of fear, not just for her children, but for the crumbling walls around the family she'd spent years protecting. What made it worse was that Sonny wasn't even home. He was chasing leads on Marco's location, unaware that the balance had shifted in his absence. Carly, who had always stood beside Sonny in times of war, now found herself holding the weight of a shattered household on her own. Christina was inconsolable, blaming herself for not being there. Michael was on edge, speaking only in clipped sentences, his eyes permanently locked on phone screens and security feeds. Even Donna's favorite doll sat untouched on the couch, a quiet symbol of the devastation that had ripped through their lives. This wasn't just another mob war. It was the beginning of something darker. Something obsessive. Something that proved Sidwell wasn't just trying to hurt Sonny, he was trying to erase him. The messages began arriving within 24 hours. No demands. No negotiations. Just drawings. Crayon pictures made with shaky hands that could only belong to children. Carly recognized the handwriting immediately. One drawing showed a house with no windows. Another showed a boat with 2 stick figures standing beside someone tall with no face. Each image tore through Carly's composure like a blade. Confirming the nightmare she didn't want to believe, Sidwell had them, and he was playing with her. The drawings weren't just updates. They were warnings. Psychological warfare. A slow burn meant to keep her awake at night, questioning everything, replaying every decision, every failed moment of protection, every second she had looked away. And that's exactly what Sidwell wanted. Carly knew this wasn't about ransom or leverage. If Sidwell had wanted to make a deal, he would have done it already. No, this was about breaking Sonny piece by piece, starting with the heart of his home. And Carly understood that if Sidwell could take Donna and Avery, then he could take any of them. Michael. Christina. Even her. No one was off limits anymore. This was no longer a matter of pride or territory. It was war fueled by obsession. Sidwell wasn't just retaliating for Marco, he was launching a calculated campaign to unravel the entire Corinthos dynasty from within. And what haunted Carly most wasn't what had happened. It was what was still coming. Because she could feel it in her chest like a pulse, this was just the beginning. Sidwell's reach was growing, his message clear. He knew their vulnerabilities, their routines, their weaknesses. And the calculated way in which he executed his plans showed that he wasn't interested in immediate destruction. He wanted psychological carnage. To make Sonny and Carly live every moment in fear, wondering who would be next, wondering when the next photograph or sketch or silent threat would arrive. The Corinthos family was being dismantled not with bullets, but with dread, with precision, with obsession. And as Carly stared into the empty bedrooms of her daughters, holding a crumpled drawing in her hand and trying to breathe through the storm of panic swallowing her whole, she realized the terrible truth. Sidwell wasn't trying to beat Sonny. He was trying to erase him. And if they didn't act fast, there might be nothing left of the Corinthos family to save. The situation unfolding in Port Charles was no longer just a conflict, it had evolved into something far more sinister, far more calculated, and infinitely more dangerous. What had once been perceived as a power struggle between Sonny Corinthos and Jen Sidwell was now spiraling into a psychological war with no rules, no boundaries, and no mercy. The latest adjustments to this already volatile situation were not just reactive moves, they were cold, deliberate shifts in strategy, proving that both men were willing to go further, risk more, and sacrifice everything to bring the other to their knees. The balance of power was gone. In its place now stood a battlefield where fear, obsession, and vengeance dictated every action. Sonny, long known for his tight control, now found himself navigating an unfamiliar terrain where his usual instincts were failing him. Sidwell had shifted the terms of engagement, transforming from a businessman with vendettas into a phantom predator who struck from the shadows, unseen and unpredictable. The kidnapping of Donna and Avery had changed everything. That single, devastating move had pulled the war out of the streets and into Sonny's home. Now, no one in his family was safe. No corner of his life was untouched. And the pressure was building, not just externally, but within him. The rage that once made him unstoppable was beginning to cloud his judgment. His decisions were no longer tactical, they were emotional, explosive. And Sidwell was counting on it. For Sidwell, every step had been rehearsed. Each phase of his plan was designed to destabilize Sonny, to isolate him from his network of power, to make him doubt his own instincts. The adjustments he had made, the calculated abduction of the girls, the taunting silence, the anonymous sketches sent to Carly, were not just acts of revenge. They were pieces of a larger puzzle. Sidwell wasn't simply retaliating. He was rebuilding the battlefield to fit his own design. And every move Sonny made to retaliate only pushed him deeper into the trap. The danger wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Sonny was losing trust in those around him. He second-guessed Jason's silence. He questioned Carly's fear. He scrutinized every ally, every message, every unknown number on his phone. The paranoia was spreading. And that, more than any bullet or explosion, was the weapon Sidwell had perfected. He had turned Sonny's strength, his loyalty, his family, his code, into weaknesses. And now, with Sonny off balance, desperate and angry, the true battle was beginning. Explosions, threats, and gunfights had marked past feuds in Port Charles. But this was different. This was a slow, methodical unraveling. The emotional damage was deeper than any physical wound. And the longer it went on, the clearer it became, this wasn't about territory or money. This was personal. This was obsession. This was Sidwell ensuring that every single person in Sonny's orbit felt fear. The latest developments proved that this new wave of calculated escalation wasn't just another chapter in the long line of mob feuds, it was a complete redefinition of the game. Sidwell had grown more dangerous because he wasn't seeking dominance. He was seeking devastation. And Sonny, for the first time in years, was fighting from a place of vulnerability. Port Charles was no longer safe. Not for the Corinthos family. Not for their allies. The entire town was beginning to feel the ripple effects of this private war-turned-public crisis. Schools increased security. Families locked doors twice. Police patrols doubled, but the fear couldn't be erased. Everyone felt it, the sense that something far worse was coming. A reckoning. A breaking point. An explosion of obsession and madness that would leave nothing untouched. And as the walls closed in around Sonny, as the pressure built beyond what even he could contain, the haunting truth became undeniable. The war wasn't just here, it had changed. It had evolved. And in doing so, it had awakened something terrifying. Because now, it wasn't just about who would win. It was about who would survive. Lucas Jones had never imagined himself standing between two titans of destruction, but as Port Charles plunged deeper into madness, he found himself as the last remaining thread of reason in a world unraveling at the seams. He had watched from the sidelines for too long, watched as Sidwell unleashed a silent storm of vengeance. Watched as Sonny's fury boiled into reckless violence, watched as children vanished, homes were torched, and families began to fracture under the weight of fear. And somewhere in that growing void of morality, he realized that if no one else would step forward, he would. Not because he believed in peace for the sake of peace, but because he understood what was truly at stake: lives, families, the future of an entire town caught in a war neither side could control anymore. The abduction of Donna and Avery was not just a personal attack, it was a seismic shift in the rules of engagement, a moment that marked the collapse of restraint and the rise of obsession. Lucas had held both girls in his arms, watched them grow, heard their laughter echo through Carly's home, and now that joy was gone, replaced by silence and whispered threats. And that silence haunted him like a second heartbeat. He couldn't stand by while children were used as weapons and parents were turned into monsters by grief. So Lucas, unarmed but resolute, began reaching out, threading his way through the labyrinth of crime, ego, and pain that separated Sonny from Sidwell, daring to believe that even in the darkest hour, words might still matter. His first steps were met with resistance. Sonny's rage was absolute, a fire that refused to be cooled, and Sidwell, lost in his own spiral of vengeance, dismissed Lucas as irrelevant. But Lucas persisted, not with demands but with quiet truths. He spoke not of power but of loss, reminding both men of what they had already sacrificed and what still remained to lose. He reminded Sonny that Donna's voice was more important than a victory, and he told Sidwell that revenge could never bring Marco back, not the way he wanted. Not without breaking every piece of himself in the process. And though neither man admitted it, something in Lucas's words began to take root. But what Lucas hadn't accounted for was how far the damage had already spread. The war between Sonny and Sidwell had become a living thing, a storm that breathed and grew, consuming everything in its path. Each day brought new casualties, new fires, new messages soaked in blood and fear. Lucas wasn't just trying to mediate anymore, he was trying to put out a wildfire with his bare hands. Yet he couldn't stop, not when he saw the way Carly trembled at night. Not when he heard Christina crying alone in the hospital chapel. Not when he saw Jason with a gun in his hand and desperation in his eyes. The danger was no longer distant. It was in the air. In every phone call that came too late, in every knock on the door after midnight. Sidwell had turned this feud into something primal, something psychological, and Lucas knew that if he failed now, the destruction wouldn't stop at the Corinthos family, it would bleed into every home, every life, until Port Charles became a graveyard of grudges and ghosts. And so, with every ounce of courage he had left, Lucas kept pushing forward. He spoke to the families of both sides, pleaded with enforcers, tracked rumors, intercepted threats, and tried to find even the smallest crack in the wall of hatred that had been built brick by bloody brick. But the more he tried, The clearer it became that he wasn't just fighting for peace, he was fighting against madness. This wasn't about negotiation anymore. It was about pulling people back from the edge before they hurled themselves into oblivion. The war had changed shape. It had become an obsession, a sickness, a fire that fed on pain. And Lucas, caught in the center, was being burned alive by the very hope that had kept him moving. Because for every step forward he made, the fire grew hotter. And the silence surrounding the missing children grew heavier. And even though he refused to stop, even though he kept speaking into the void, a part of him began to understand the terrifying truth, that sometimes, peace is not something you can create. Sometimes, it's something you have to fight for with everything you have, knowing it still might never come. But Lucas fought anyway, not because he believed in victory, but because he believed that someone had to try. And as the city held its breath, as the final pieces moved into place, and as the war between Sonny and Sidwell boiled into something irreversible, Lucas stood his ground, tired, terrified, but unbroken, because even in a world where obsession ruled and danger lit every corner, he was still the only one trying to save what remained of their souls.